Let me just say well done to Sherry Markson for her amazing interview with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, last night. 2 quick points I will make that nobody else has made. One, Netanyahu was correct to point out that the Palestinians already had a state in Gaza. And look how they used it for murder and terror and evil depravity. Why on earth would you give them another crack at it? Secondly, thanks to the Albanese government's blatant hatred of Israel, Australians, every one of us, in all walks of life, has now been forced to choose. Who do you support? The murderous Islamist fanatics or Israel? I've made my choice. It's up to you now. And if you're struggling with that choice, I sure do pity you. I'll have more to say about that with the panel later in the show. Meanwhile, I've just returned from Broome, where the Australian newspaper Hancock Prospecting and others, including Optus, Woolworths and Sky News, hosted the annual Bush Summit, which for the next 2 weeks is touring remote parts of the country. My role was a real privilege, which was to introduce one of the keynote speakers, Mrs. Gina Rinehart. And what a speech it was. But what was fascinating to me were the ideas and the passion evident in the room to develop Broome as a major destination for young Aussies and young Aussie families and small businesses to come and make some money. The reality is that despite all the oppressive federal and state regulations, Broome and the Kimberley and the Pilbara still have a touch of the Wild West about them. Go west, young man, go west, young woman. If you want to make your own fortune, create your own life. As you know, I'm totally opposed to the normal welcome to countries that blight nearly every meeting, event, classroom and boardroom of this country. A meaningless, trite ceremony largely invented by Ernie Dingo in the 1970s with ridiculous pagan ceremonial gestures like burning leaves and inhaling the smoke. But the welcome to country performed in Broome at the summit was the complete opposite. No silly gestures, no patronising platitudes, but rather a solid, relevant and purposeful speech by a very impressive Diane Appleby. I'm sorry I don't go for all that auntie stuff. Diane is not my auntie and she's probably not yours. But a great speech by Diane Appleby in which she urged and eagerly welcomed all young Australians and all Australians from all walks of life to come or go to Broome. Come to the Kimberley, bring your ideas, bring your projects, your small businesses, your energy, and through hard work and enterprise, enrich yourselves and the nation. This was no, oh, woe is me, I'm so oppressed speech. And it was the opposite of all that, let's shut down Uluru or shut down this or that beach or whatever so no one can go on it. It was the complete opposite, the complete reverse, with Diane Appleby quoting her mother's observations about the richness of the earth in the Kimberley and the opportunities, not only to nurture and enjoy it for tourism and so on, but to build on it and to prosper from it for agriculture, mining and enterprise for all Australians.
There's beautiful richness. There's a richness. I never understood my mother. She said there is richness under the land that we walk on and the sea that we travel on.
There's gold in them there hills. Yesterday, former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett was extremely blunt. Victoria is effed, the state of Victoria. If I had a young family shivering away in socialist Victoria trying to start up my business surrounded by lunatic lefties and machete bins, I'd be packing my bags and heading off to Broome tomorrow. As one panellist at the summit pointed out, the population of Broome is roughly 50% Indigenous Australians and 50% transients, mainly from Europe, young people who go there for a couple of years and have a great wild adventure before returning to their homes in Europe or elsewhere. Where are the Aussies? The challenge is to get more Australians making the trek and enjoying the phenomenal rewards of a productive life in the bush. Another panellist, only half jokingly I suspect, suggested there needed to be some form of conscription to get young Aussie kids to spend their first year after school living and working in the bush.
We used to make, I think, backpackers do a year in the remote Australia to get a second-year visa. I'm not against that for young Australians to do a year national service or a year in ag in the remote location.
Hilariously, this led to one of the West Australian ministers to quickly say that the Cook government had no plans to introduce compulsory conscription. Don't worry about it.
But look, I mean, I think there's ways to encourage it. As I said, I think we'll rule out conscription.
Don't you just love politicians? There were plenty of other ideas, great ideas, about how to make Australians head to the northwest, head to the bush, and the things government should and should not be doing, including the idea of changing the cabotage laws for northwest Australia so that foreign-owned airlines and shipping lines, tourist ships, whatever, could fly or sail directly to the northwest coast, either for trade or tourism, without having to go through Sydney or Melbourne, which would be a massive boon and, I suspect, a massive boom for the local economy, which seems it's a no-brainer to me. Of course, you didn't hear any of this sort of inventive thinking or genuinely productive thinking from a single one of the half-wits at Jim Chalmers' round table, or rather Jim Chalmers' Lazy Susan Summit. I call it the Lazy Susan Summit because all they did was spin the same tired old leftover socialist ideas round and round the table. Oh, I'll have one of those, I'll have one of those. When everybody leaves, the Australian economy is still hungry. What measly slops were served up, including such memorable phrases from Jim Chalmers as, I think the way that the discussion unfolded was that the best thing they can do is to structure their involvement in our work. Great stuff. Meanwhile, at the other end of the continent in Broome, the Bush Summit had lots of great economic ideas, including local academic Peter Yu, for example. But what wasn't really addressed satisfactorily to my mind, but which does urgently need to be addressed in this nation, is the crippling effect native title is having on rural and Indigenous lives. Rather than empowering Indigenous Australians, in my opinion, until native title can be bought and sold, traded in parcels, perhaps on a 99-year lease basis like you have in the UK, then all native title does is suppress economic activity rather than encourage it. Native title areas need to be divvied up equally, person by person, amongst the relevant tribes, clans, whatever, and any individual should then have the right to sell that parcel of land or indeed to buy others. The other big suppressant of economic activity across the bush, and this was addressed in varying degrees by different speakers, was, of course, net zero, which is not only destroying every aspect of Australian economic activity, of course Jim Chalmers in his clown show didn't mention it, but is even more destructive to people on the land as it is to us in the cities, and that's saying something. As Mrs. Gina Reinhardt pointed out, not only does net zero mean transmission lines, solar panels, windmills, desecrating and destroying for all time vast swathes of fertile Australian land, literally depriving the nation of its food resources, but there is no way the business of farming can remain viable under net zero.
Heartbreaking, isn't it? Many of our farmers and their families and farms are already suffering from net zero ideology. As we speed up ClimateGate, there'll be worse to come. Australia, still being in the Paris Accord, will saddle them with net zero restrictions, paperwork, and huge expense. They already have more than enough to worry about. Farmers are already leaving the agricultural industry. If you add net zero cost and take burdens, buying equipment that doesn't exist, unreliable, inadequate, more expensive electricity, inflating costs overall, how can our farmers survive?
Indeed. Adam Giles, who was once Chief Minister of the Northern Territory and Sky fans will remember, had his own show here on Sky for a while, also spoke passionately about the disaster that is net zero.
Now, nowhere is the disconnect with regional Australia clearer than in the reckless push for net zero, the greatest self-imposed business and livelihoods destroyer in our history. In this energy resource-rich nation, we've adopted an absurd energy policy which is sacrificing our role and our revenue as a global energy-producing superpower, while at the same time tearing up productive farmland for unreliable solar and wind, which requires massive, expensive transmission lines, estimated to cost the taxpayer more than $1 trillion, plus the cost of expensive batteries.
There were more solid ideas for the future of this nation coming out of a handful of farmers and bushies in Broome than the entire windbag fest in Canberra this week. In my opinion, Chris Bowen and the Albanese government are potentially willfully destroying this nation's future capacity to feed itself and to secure our future prosperity with their insane, crippling net zero policies and their red, green, black, blue tape, whatever. But if I was struggling in some inner city socialist Labor hellhole, struggling to get my small business idea off the ground, struggling to afford a home, I'd be hot-footing it off to an adventure in Broome and the Kimberley. At least they genuinely do welcome you there.